Hello, everybody. Here we are, January 4th, 2023. And today I'm going to talk a lot about some things this year, but I'm not going to make it a prophetic word in the sense of all the events that come. What I'm going to talk about is the equipping that you must be equipped with. God gives us some very clear things. He says, put on the full armor. But in understanding that, I'm going to go through some history. In that history, we'll kind of learn about how emotions play in, how you can just give up so quickly. But then how when people stand and stay the course, how there's victory. So what I'm going to talk about, it's Space Voyage a little bit. And Space Voyage was amazing for its time because for the time that we were in, it's like the first object ever to be launched into space was 1957. It was called Sputnik. But then after that came the Apollos, which was the rockets that were sent. At first, they just went into the Earth's atmosphere, and then they finally went to the moon, and quite a few visits to the moon. But I'm not getting into all the details of that. What I'm going to get in is the details of one of them and what happened, where they went. So some of this story will take a bit of time to develop. I'm not going to get into all the details of it because we're not making this a science project. This is to just bring in to show that they were in bad shape. And, if anybody did not stand a course and really believe, they would have never made it home. There were so many things that plagued that mission. And I want to share about that today. Okay, here we go. So first of all, I'll start with a little bit of things because this is the funny thing about mankind. We tend to worry about everything. So Sputnik being the first thing was the Russians that launched it. It was a satellite that was going to go around the world and spy. And every 90 minutes, it would basically do one full revolution around the Earth. So that in the daytime, it went to different positions, but it would go 7 times over the United States through a day. The Americans did not like that at that time because the satellite was able to get details about what's below it. So when they had the news in 1957, it was October 4th, there was the first Sputnik. People huddled around radios and families and everywhere around the world, and they made this big emotional thing about it. They go, Sputnik's listening. And you could hear this thing, and all of a sudden they put a sound of the beep, beep, beep of the satellite going through. Well, no one could hear that satellite. It's way up in the atmosphere, above everything. But here they are, just really embellishing on the fact that now this thing's over them and they're in danger. And, Russia and the United States had some tensions. And so it was really like everyone was thinking they could see us, they could watch us. And it wasn't so. They could see some things, but not the way people thought. And so they really pushed it, and it became this big fear. And I believe sometimes you can over embellish on something, something, a little bit of knowledge, and you hear somebody else say it, and then you make a parakeet of it, and you repeat it, and then people expand on it. And then all of a sudden, it went from being a little dog to becoming this huge monster. And that's what Sputnik 1 was. Sputnik 2, they launched a dog up in the space. It was basically 1 month later after Sputnik 1. And Sputnik 1 didn't make it back to Earth. It entered Earth's atmosphere and burnt up. Neither did Sputnik 2. The dog that they sent up never made it home, but it was alive and well in space, and that's what they were trying to see. They also launched a monkey, I believe it was November 29th, 1961. And they launched a monkey up into space just to see how it would, and it returned. But the whole point is that this was all new. You got to imagine that today your computer is this little microchip. In those days, it was these big, massive reels inside these machines that were taped about that thick, and it would roll really fast through, and it would go back and forth reading the tape. That was the computer of those days. It would take a lot of space to hold some memory. So the computer really changed, and incredibly changed. So, but for those days, that's what they had, and that's what they worked with. But for where they were at, that worked pretty good. So we had to go on from those positions. So I'm going to pause for one quick second here. So the Apollos, there's been several Apollos. Two of them had already gone to the moon, landed on the moon. And here we have another one that was heading for moon. It was Apollo 13. It was due to land on the moon and then to do some certain space and check certain basins out and to look at the life survivability, what there was, to learn more about our space. So everything seemed okay except on liftoff. On the day that they lifted off, which was April 11th, 1970, they felt a shudder and they didn't quite get what was going on, but they kept going in their flight. Later on, they'd heard a big explosion, and that's what I'm going to get into. Where the problem was, they were 200,000 miles away from home. Now, I'm not sure in kilometers, but I know it's a lot. So they were a long way from Earth. You couldn't call a local help or anything. There was none. If anything ever happened to a rocket on its way, by the time they loaded a new rocket on the platform, by the time they got going, it would probably be about 5 days. And then they had to travel that distance to get out there to get to that spaceship. It's not just firing off and flying. How rockets leave our Earth atmospheres, they do orbits around the Earth, and they use the pull of the gravity as a slingshot, because it's not all the rockets that send it. It's also the gravitational pull that acts like a slingshot and sends the rocket off, which it'll be explained on why I'm sharing that for what happened. And it's interesting. But some of the things that are said, you don't realize it, how important it is. There's things in life, little bumps along the way, you don't realize it, but it all adds up to the next phase, next phase, next phase. So here I go. I'm going to get into it. So here's Apollo 13. It leaves 5.5 minutes after liftoff. It says they felt a small vibration. Then the center engine S2 stage shut down 2 minutes early. So in a rocket, what happens is when there's a stage that stops, it also separates out and you lose whatever's left in that rocket. So you want to use it up completely until you get to the next section. They lost 2 minutes of that. 2 minutes doesn't sound like much, but when you're pulling away from an atmosphere, it's a lot of fuel being used. Then you're having to use fuel from other things. So watch this. It says, this caused the remaining 4 engines to burn 34 seconds longer. They're talking seconds, but in space, those seconds are very important because you have no gravitational pull in space. So those 34 seconds can get you a long, long way, unless you've used it up. So 34 seconds longer than planned. And the third stage had burnt 9 seconds longer to put Apollo 13 in orbit. Days before the mission, backup of lunar module pilot Charles Dukes, so you could start seeing all these things unfolding. It says, inadvertently exposed the crew to German's measles. Command module pilot Ken Mattingly had no immunity to the measles and had been replaced the backup command module pilot with Jack Swigert. The Swigert, whatever it is, Swigert. It says, I'm going to jump that part. But they had helium tanks in the lunar module. And so the lunar module, they called it the LEM for abbreviation. And it says the descent stage. So the flight plan was modified to enter the LEM 3 hours early in order to obtain an onboard readout of the helium tank pressures. The number 2 oxygen tank, that don't need the serial number, but I'll jump here. It says it dropped really quickly. So this is what happened. Apollo 13 was to be the 3rd lunar landing attempt, but the mission was aborted after the rupture of the service module oxygen tanks. Still, it was classified a successful failure because the experience gained in rescuing the crew. The mission spent upper stage successfully impacted the moon. He says, during the first 2 days, the crew ran into a couple of minor surprises, but generally Apollo 13 was looking like the smoothest flight of the program. At 46 hours and 43 minutes, Joe Kerwin, the capsule communicator and Capcom on duty, said the spacecraft is in real good shape. Okay, so at 55 hours, 46 minutes, the crew finished a 40-minute TV program showing how comfortable they lived and worked in weightlessness. Lovell said, this crew of the Apollo 13 wishing everybody the nice evening. And we're just, excuse me, the lighting, just about ready to close out the inspection of Aquarius and get back to a pleasant evening in Odyssey. Good night. 9 minutes later, oxygen tank number 2 blew up, causing the number 1 tank also to fail. The command module normally supplied the electricity, lights, water was lost, and they were about 200,000 miles from Earth. The message came in from a sharp bang, a vibration at 9:08 p.m., April 13. So we saw a warning light accompanied the bang and said, Houston, we have a problem. So then Lovell came and told the ground that it was a main B bus undervolt, which means they were losing all their electrical power. He says, next, the warning light indicated the loss of 2 or 3 fuel cells, which were the spacecraft's primary source of electricity. With warning lights blinking, 1 oxygen tank appeared to be completely empty, and there were indications that the oxygen in the second tank was rapidly depleting. 13 minutes after the explosion, Lovell happened to look out at the left-hand window and saw the final evidence pointing towards a potential catastrophe. We are venting out something out into space. He reported, Houston, Capcom, Jack. Lusma replied, Roger, we copy, you're venting. So then he continues on, he says, Lovell says, it's a gas of some sort. It was oxygen, gas escaping at a high rate from the second and last oxygen tank. Now remember, they're thinking that the 2 oxygen tank to keep them alive, it's now almost empty. So he says, then he continues on, he says this, he says, first thing the crew did, even before discovering the oxygen leak, was try to close the hatch between the command module and the lunar module. They reacted spontaneously, similar to a submarine crew closing hatches to limit the amount of flooding. First, Swigert and them Lovell tried to lock the reluctant hatch, but stubborn lid wouldn't stay shut. Exasperated and realizing there wasn't a cabin leak, they strapped the hatch to the command module couch. The pressure in the number 1 oxygen tank continued to drift downwards, passing 300 pounds per square inch, then headed towards 200 pounds per square inch. Months later, after the accident investigation was completed, it was determined that when the number 2 tank blew up, it either ruptured the line on the number 1 tank or caused the valve to leak. When the pressure reached 200 pounds pressure, it says per square inch, the crew and ground control knew they would lose all oxygen, which meant that the last fuel cell also would die. At 1 hour, 29 seconds after the bang, Lusma said after instruction from the flight, he says, it is slowly going to 0, and we are starting to think about the lunar module lifeboat. So in other words, the lunar module is tied to the command module. It was supposed to go down to the moon and come back up. And when it's done that, then they release it. They don't need it anymore. Instead, it's become a lifeboat. So it's built in. So the command module on the back part of it, enclosed in its walls, had the lunar module. And when they were ready, they would open it up, and then the lunar module would disconnect and come around and hook up at the front end. And then people would move from the command module into the lunar module to go down to the moon. This was not going to happen. Now they were stuck where they had to use that lunar module as a lifeboat. He says, that's what we have been thinking about too. Ground controller in Houston faced a formidable task. Completely new procedures had to be written and tested in simulators before being passed on to the crew. The navigation problem had to be solved. Essentially, how, when, and in what altitude to burn the LEM descent engine to provide quick return home. With only 15 minutes of power left in the command module, Lusma told the crew to make their way into the LEM. Lovell quickly floated through the tunnel, leaving Swigert to perform the last chores of the command module. The first concern was to determine if there were enough consumables to get home. The lunar module was built only for 45 hours lifetime, and it needed to be stretched to 90, so it would take twice the time. Oxygen was a problem. The full LEM descent tanks alone would suffice, in addition that there were 2 ascent engines, oxygen tanks, and 2 backups full of oxygen that would never be used on the lunar surface. 2 emergency bottles on top of those packs, each at 6 or 7 pounds in them. At the lunar module jettison, just before re-entry, 28.5 pounds of oxygen remain. That's not a whole bunch for all the guys being on board. He says more than half of what was available after the explosion. He says power also was concerned. There were 2,181 amperes hours left in the main battery. Ground controllers carefully worked out the procedures so that the command module batteries were charged with LEM power. All non-critical systems were turned off. Energy consumption was reduced to one-fifth, which resulted in having 20% LEM electrical power left. Aquarius was jettisoned. So I'm going to move down a bit further here. What was the main consumable concern? It was estimated that the crew would run out of water about 5 hours before Earth. Re-entry, which was calculated at about 151 hours. However, data of, okay, I'll jump that part. He says the crew conserved water. They cut down 6 ounces each per day. That's not very much water. It's less than 1 cup. 1/5 of normal intake. And used fruit juice. They had hot dogs and other wet packed foods when they ate at all. The crew became dehydrated throughout the flight, and set records stood up throughout. Apollo level lost 14 pounds and crew lost. Okay, and it doesn't matter that part. It says removable of carbon dioxide. And this was another problem that plagued them. There's scrubbers that remove the carbon dioxide from the capsule so that they don't get asphyxiated by the carbon monoxide. Well, dioxide. What happened is they had to clean that. And how they clean that is they had to make a new system to clean out the air. And that's what they worked on. Excuse me. Removal of carbon dioxide also was a concern. There were enough lithium hydroxide canisters which removed carbon dioxide from the spacecraft. But the square canisters from the common module were not compatible with the round openings in the lunar. And this is all these situations rolling and people working and trying to find out. What was known is that the leader that was leading over everything to make sure that they brought these men home, he said, if any of you believe we're not bringing them home, leave now. He says, only the ones that you know we're going to bring them back, stay. Because he knew that all the doubters would only block it for everybody else. And he wanted only people that were going to see them home. And every situation they came across, they found an answer. So here they're building, they found everything that was inside the module to build these things to make connections so they could scrub the air. Here we go. You might have to mute yourself there. Okay. So he continues, says, one big question was how to get back safely to Earth. LEM navigation system was designated to help in this situation. Before explosion, 30 hours to 40 minutes, Apollo 13 had made the normal mid-course correction. And that's what I was talking about. They needed to go around the room and use it as a slingshot to come home. So it's like instead of heading towards home, you're heading away from home and going around, and there's this dead spot where they can't communicate because they're behind the moon and the Earth can't get the communication from them. So there's a period of time where there's silence. And then when they come out that other side, they've got to be on the right trajectory to use the moon orbit or gravity to slingshot them across back home, which would give them enough of what they needed. So here we are. I'm going to jump some of this. I'll cut this part out. It will take a lot of time in there. Yeah, so 3 hours later, this is when they're coming back towards Earth. They left the crew left the lunar module Aquarius, and excuse me, they left the LEM and went back. Crew left the lunar module Aquarius and then splashed down gently in the Pacific near Samoa. And what they did is they went back into the command module. They stayed connected, but at the end, then that's when they went across and separated. I think that's where I'll cut it for there. Now, you look at how many things plagued them for this thing. Even before leaving ground, they had a problem with a lot of systems. They even didn't lift off. They had to postpone. One guy brought the measles. All the guys got the measles. On takeoff, they had this vibration. They're going, something's not right. They get out near the moon, 200,000 miles away. At 2,000 miles away, if you run out of oxygen, it's a bad day. You're going to sit there fighting for air, and that's the end of you. But they had some backup in the other module. Now, I'm going to touch on this for a second. First of all, you're 200,000 miles away, and you hear bang. And all of a sudden, all your lights come on. This is happening. You're losing your power. You're losing your oxygen. Your first thought is, you're not calling a local mechanic to come fix you. You're not calling for help from anybody. You're out there, and that's it. You're out there. They didn't give up. They stood the course. They could have got all crazy in the head. They could have said, that's it, we're dead. They never took those to their lips because their hearts weren't into giving up. Their heart was solution-based, and they were looking for the answer. And they kept searching and pressing and not accepting anything as defeat, but everything is a challenge that has a solution. In life, we could often find ourselves. You look at Lot. You look at things that happened to Elijah. All these things that went on with different people. You look at Moses. He comes up. There's a sea in front of him. The people are going, "That's it. We're done." And the children of Israel were so amazing that way. They kept finding on why they couldn't go forward. They were stuck. That was the end. Why did you leave us in Egypt? At least they were nice. They let us do the bricks with straws. When people lack intestinal fortitude or commitment, they're very quickly to give up. God didn't create people that just give up. He created people that would have fortitude, that would stand before him, trust him, believe in him, and stand through all situations. In 2023, there'll be a lot of things happening. Don't be a parakeet. Don't repeat things. Know what God has to say. So you may have perfect political understanding. You may have perfect understanding of the economy. You may have perfect social understanding, but it means nothing. You could repeat it. You could be a parakeet. You can go around and tell everybody. You could prove to them. The real factor is what did the Lord tell you? That's what you need to be telling. Don't tell the circumstance. Tell the answer. Because when you've been in God's presence, you'll bring peace, you'll bring hope, you'll bring joy, you'll bring strength to others. Stop being a parakeet. I heard so many things, out of the Philippines and different places when COVID came. It was ridiculous, the stuff I heard. I heard some people saying, it doesn't exist. Well, it did exist. It was there. But the thing is, it wasn't what it was being put out to be. Then you'd hear other people saying, you are against God if you don't take the vaccine. That's called manipulation, controls. That's abomination. To be doing that to anybody, to make them feel guilty, causing separation in the church because you believe the right thing is for them to submit and take that vaccine. And now here comes the information showing that a lot of the vaccines were actually dangerous and harming people. So I'm saying to you that you got to be very careful with your tongue. You may be responsible for encouraging many people to bringing disaster upon themselves because you feel righteously correct and that you want people to be Christians to be. And this is what bases out of that. It's that Christians need to be seen as people that are strong, that are together, that are united. But it didn't say united to the flesh. It talks about united in the spirit. When you start telling people that they're a bad Christian if they don't take the vaccine, you have now just put them in a place where they feel guilt, they feel shame, they feel that they're going to do wrong if they don't take it. And then afterwards, you may have to answer to some people that have permanent problems because of that vaccine, because you encourage and you put guilt and shame. You use witchcraft. What do you mean witchcraft? Witchcraft is this: when you use your mental power to make somebody do something you want. That's manipulation, witchcraft. It's a rebellion. So if any of you pastors did that, repent, ask God forgiveness. And that's my point, is not to bring this to you. My point is that in times of trouble, you got overcome by the problem instead of hearing from God. If you would have gone to God, he would have never put those words in your mouth, because God knew what was going on. And God was not unconcerned, he wasn't worried about all the things. But the thing too is, he didn't have shame, he didn't have guilt. And one thing he knew is the outcome. It was prophesied way beforehand. There's so many prophecies that came out saying of what would happen through COVID. And, if you would talk to me about the SARS, different flus that came, I would agree with you. There was serious stuff. COVID was not one of them. Very small number of people, 1% or less, that died. But it was blown out of proportion, locked down the world. Man, we should have locked down the world for SARS, for anything else. But I think there was a hidden reason behind that. It brought economic disaster. A lot of governments that were working together, that are involved with some type of economic forum, they found themselves printing money like crazy, indebting their country. And each one of them, time after time, were asked, where'd this money go? They didn't have to answer it because their country was under emergency or under a big problem of pandemic. So still to this day, a lot of these countries never told the other political parties where the money went. It'll happen in a few years from now. They'll have no choice. They'll have to tell. They'll have to bring out and show. Right now they redact, they hide, but later on they won't be able to do that. This is the problem. A lot of people in 5 years from now, they won't care. They'll go, that's in the past. Well, it is and it isn't. If you allowed people that you elected to become your boss, you allow them to rule over you and to do tyranny, then you shouldn't take a laissez-faire attitude. You should be really clear about, no, this can't happen. In the future, this can't happen. We, the people, when you're in a diplomatic country, we, the people, you elect your people. They need to answer to you. And that didn't happen through COVID. There was a lot of rhetoric and the news media all involved. And the rhetoric that came out of there was that you were a bad person unless you toed the line the way they told you to. I'm not going to bother getting into it now, but what's coming out of all this, you'll be shocked. And part of it is, it's that you've been numbered through this. And that numbering that's coming is also going to decide whether or not in a few years you have a rights to board a flight. You have rights to travel, rights to do anything. And you're saying, oh, no. Are you kidding me? You let them lock you up in your house. You let them tell you that you weren't allowed to go to church, but the bars were allowed to be open. So don't tell me, oh no. If you let that happen, then there's a problem. And it took, in Canada here, it took the truckers that went out and made a big protest, and that stopped it. Then they did the same thing in the United States, and then there's changes there. But then also in China, no individual, no human being really wants to have to protest against their government. But if their governments are overreaching and acting in tyranny, then the people have to rise up. And there's a lot more I could add into that, but I'm not doing that today because that's not my point. The point is, talking Apollo 13 is in the face of everything you could imagine that could go wrong. It's a matter of solving it. They did it as people. But imagine this, when you face something, you go to the Lord and you trust the Lord and you believe in him. And as you surrender to him and you trust him, he speaks to you, he leads you, he guides you. We're coming into an hour where it's so important for you to hear God's voice accurately that you'll say, God, it's not everybody else is doing this. It's God, what do you want me to do? What am I supposed to do in this circumstance? If elections are being flawed, if there's people toying or doing dishonest, God, what do you want me to do? Well, you could be political and go out there and wave signs. I believe this, the most powerful weapon you have is your prayers. And I say this again, you're the most powerful weapon on the face of this earth. When you stand and you trust in God's word and you speak it out, you're the most powerful weapon because you don't harm people. You tear down principalities and powers and rulers of darkness in high places. So you resolve, you're not harming people by doing that. Pray, believe, see God strong in your life. Don't be a person that looks at the problem and gives up. Apollo 13, there's a movie on it. Go look at it. It's they I don't know if they embellish or not, but the movie's quite good actually for its days. And they go through all the issues and you know, imagine yourself, you walk through the front door of a cave and the front door disappears, it caves in. That's when you're asking yourself, it's like, what do we do now? Now imagine being 200,000 miles away and you get an explosion, your oxygen, your power's going, everything's falling apart. You don't know if you're going to make it home. That's not a good thing. So I'm going to encourage you, it's that your attitude in Christ is what really counts. In this year to come and the years to come, do not be a reporter and a cackler that just repeats what you feel, see, and hear others say. Instead, hear what God says and be able to say, thus saith the Lord. Or bring it up to more modern days, God says. So you don't have to get so dramatic with the thus. All right? Okay. So I encourage you, please get over yourself. The Lord tells you, nothing is impossible to them that believe. Amen? And then you look at 2 Chronicles 7:14. It says, if my people called by my name will humble themselves, pray, turn from their wicked ways, I will forgive their sins and heal their land. Hear that message and move forward. Serve Christ with all your heart, soul, strength, and ability. Amen. Bless you.